I bet you're wondering why a white guy from West Virginia is here talking to a bunch of Persian entrepreneurs. Well, strangely, I'm probably one of the biggest supporters of entrepreneurs all over the world. A lot of investors in the US actually don't really leave their zip code very often. In fact, a lot of folks in Silicon Valley think that most of the world's best companies are right in their backyard. And, you know, they have a lot of evidence to show that that's true. A few of them might go to New York or might go to LA on occasion. But not too many of them will come to Europe or go to Asia or leave the United States. I, on the other hand, was the founder of a company called 500 Startups, and we're a little different. I would say probably we're a little crazy. We've invested in over 1,000 companies in the last 5 years, and about 300 of those companies weren't in the US. In fact, they're spread across about 50 different countries around the world. I spend probably about 6 months out of the year on a plane. I usually visit at least 20 to 25 countries a year, and probably about 50 or 60 different cities. It's really just because I like to eat. I don't get enough food at home. Anyway, I'm going to talk a little bit about what our philosophy is about investing. Some of that has nothing to do with Iran or Persian startups. A lot of it just has to do with innovations that have happened in technology over the last 10 years or so. But I think a lot of the things that we're doing are applicable in many other startup ecosystems around the world. I don't have all the answers, and I'm not sure that anything we're doing is going to be perfect, but I'll tell you a little bit about what we're doing, and you can see if it's applicable. I guess I'm going to expect somebody else to control slides, or is there a clicker here that I should be looking for? Whoever's involved in the magical slides, if you could advance the slides, that would be great. Oh, that worked. That was awesome. Can I try that again? Okay, I'm going to talk about 3 things. Changes in building technology startups, changes in venture capital, and then a little bit about building startup ecosystems. Oh, okay, wow. I kind of liked it better when I was just waving my hand. That was great. Can I move away from this thing? This doesn't actually need me, right? Great. Okay, really quickly, the commercial. I'm a geek. I've been in Silicon Valley for about 25 or 26 years. Started out as an engineer, programmer, developer, gradually shifted over to entrepreneur. Did some marketing at PayPal for a few years before and after the IPO and acquisition. Made some angel investments, a few of those worked out, and then now I'm a dirty blood-sucking venture capitalist in Silicon Valley. And I run something called 500 Startups. Yeah, there's some other logos up there that might be interesting. A few of those companies doing pretty well. Where do I point this? Okay, there we go. So what is 500 Startups? It's kind of a crazy name. At least when we started it seemed crazy, although now we've actually invested more than twice our name, and people are like, are you going to change the name? And I'm like, nah, probably not. We have about 175 million under management. We've deployed about 105 of that. We have a lot of people working for us. We don't really pay ourselves very well, but there's about 50 people in the company, 20 of whom are doing investments. We speak about 20 languages. That's a little different than most US venture capital firms. Actually, about half the company is female, and about 40% of our investing partners are female, and half the managing partners are female. About a third of the people weren't born in the US. And we're kind of all over the world. We're not everywhere yet, but we're working on it. Like I said, we've invested in a lot of companies, and a few of them are working. So what's different about building tech startups these days? So I chose sort of 2 bookend moments, which were the most recent financial disasters that we've been through recently. I actually was in the Valley for both of these. In fact, I was in the Valley for one prior to that that was not so much of a startup downturn, but was just a downturn in the 90s. But these 2 were kind of interesting. So before the year 2000, people were still really excited about building startups in Silicon Valley. Actually, everybody was really excited about startups in the mid-90s. But if you look at what it actually took to build a
tech startup or an internet startup, it was actually kind of a pain in the ass. It took a couple of years. You gave up a lot of money to Oracle or Sun or a company called Exodus, which some of you may remember at the time. You probably had to raise at least 5 to 10 million to get a product out the door, and most of that would go to a lot of those companies. There weren't a lot of people online, and the sources of capital were very constrained to mostly Silicon Valley and Boston. But you would never have known that that was a hassle. If you talked to anybody in Silicon Valley in the US at the time, they were really ecstatic. In fact, they were probably drunk on success, or at least their thoughts of what success were in the mid-late 90s. Later, we found out that wasn't really that successful. There were a lot of internet companies that had raised a lot of money and maybe even IPO'd for a lot of money, but they actually weren't making very much money. In fact, some of them weren't making money at all. Some of them weren't even generating revenue. A lot of those companies went public and made a lot of money for people. Depending on the timing, they may have gotten away with that. Actually, one of my investors, Mark Cuban, did extremely well, selling a company called Broadcast.com to Yahoo for multi-billions of dollars, and then shorting Yahoo on the way back down later. I don't want to get into too much of that story, but the point that I'm wanting to make here is that people were really excited about Silicon Valley in the mid-late 90s when the internet was really just getting started and there wasn't a lot of people online and things were really expensive and hard to build. And today I go all around the world and people moan and complain about how hard it is to build startups, and I'm not in Silicon Valley, and we don't have venture capitalists, and oh this and oh that, and you know what? It's just a bunch of bullshit, because it's easier to build a startup anywhere in the world right now than it was in Silicon Valley 20 years ago or 15 years ago. In fact, there are probably some amazing startups in Iran right now that are dramatically better than what's going on in Silicon Valley 15 years ago, probably some that are better than Silicon Valley startups right now. Even with all the challenges in a lot of emerging markets, the internet today is a dramatically simpler, sexier, more amazing beast to go after. There are more people online. Things cost a lot less to build. There's many more platforms and plumbing and infrastructure for you to build on top of. You have social platforms, you have storage platforms, you have e-commerce platforms, you have email platforms, you have everything. There are lots of people who want to invest. It costs a lot less. There are more people online. It's great! It's awesome! Life is so much better now. And it's going to keep getting better. Monetization's still kind of a pain in the ass. We got to fix that. Delivery and logistics, probably also a pain in the ass. Maybe we'll figure out some drones to deliver stuff to you soon. So like everything is pretty much up and to the right. It's all looking good, and people still complain a little bit. Yes, I understand capital is not accessible everywhere. Yes, you have some problems. Some of us have some very big problems. But life is a lot better. So I just want to remind people, we were really psyched about Silicon Valley 15, 20 years ago when it was actually pretty damn hard. The challenges we have today are actually not that hard. Now, there are some that are challenging, but they're not due to technology and cost, at least. So what's happened? Well, the cost of building software-based companies has dropped dramatically, probably by not one, but 2 orders of magnitude. At least in the first year or two, it's mostly just people's time that we're paying for. There are lots of platforms for getting access to capital. Again, those are not accessible everywhere, but it's a lot easier for people around the world. The major change is not really a technology change. It's a change in communication. There are a lot of people online, and a lot of them can talk to each other, and they do. They talk to each other on social platforms, via mobile platforms, on video, messaging platforms. They do search. There's probably at least 5 to 10 global platforms that have hundreds of millions, if not billions of people on them, and there's going to be more. And those things are happening faster than ever before. And it really is kind of amazing. I was watching the opening video. I'm not sure what was going on there, but it was really just amazing watching people sing and hang out together. And I have that experience every day. I have that experience on Facebook, on Twitter, on messaging platforms every day. And I have it with people all over the world. I've built relationships and friends all over the world now. And it's really, you know, it sounds sappy, but it's really touching. It really is amazing to see people have children and celebrate birthdays and lose loved ones sometimes. And lots of things that happen all over the world I see. And there are people with different religions in different countries. It's not a technology change. It's a people change. I guarantee you, when you see people all over the world on your news feed, on your mobile phones, in different countries, speaking different languages, after a while, you start to have a connection. You can't ignore that anymore. If there's a bus accident or something that happens in China or in the Middle East or in Africa, you feel a little different about that than you used to. It's not really a technology change, it's a people change. The other thing is that because of a lot of the small amounts of capital that are required to get these off the ground, there's a lot of people trying stuff. A lot of it fails, but it fails cheap and it fails fast. And that's actually important. Fast, cheap, fail is very important. That's part of the experimentation process. If you look at a lot of these companies that provide platforms for us to build on, some of them have been around for a while. Amazon and Google probably 10, 15 years now. Some of them less. Facebook and Twitter really less than a decade. Apple's been around for a while, but the iPhone hasn't been around that long. Android hasn't been around that long. And then some of the platforms on the right, picture and messaging platforms, have been around for really just a few years. And yet they have hundreds of millions of people. WhatsApp, probably over 500 million, maybe 600 million. I'm not quite sure. I think WeChat about 500 or 600 million. WhatsApp was bought for $19 billion. That seemed to wake up a lot of media who weren't that interested in that stuff maybe a few years ago. So the ability to reach people online greater than ever before. And what's kind of important for software-based developers, the ability to distribute applications and services is also happening at a really fast pace to a very large number of people online, mostly cheap and in some cases free. But probably more important than either of those is it's measurable. I can see what's happening. I can see what people are using. I can see whether they're using it, liking it, sharing it, buying stuff with it, or not. So that has an impact on how we build. And sometimes the technology even works. Whoa, wait. Was that what somebody said? Wait. I hate waiting. So how does this change how we think about building software? Well, a lot of people who build businesses think that business plans are really important. And in fact, a lot of us investors encourage them to think about writing down business plans because that's what thoughtful people do. They write down business plans. They think about the business. They think about it a lot. They write about it a lot. They plan it a lot. And then they have this really important document that they present to their investors. And their investors think, oh, this person took a lot of time and thought to write about this business. They must be very smart. I'm going to invest in that business. Wrong! No, that is not why we invest in businesses. I do not invest in your business because you're a good writer. I do not invest in your business because you're a good storyteller. Well, sometimes I do, but not that story. What I want to see is a functional product that people are using. That's what I want to invest in. Also, the business of building startups is full of mistakes. We make mistakes all the time, so we don't walk linearly forward the path that we planned when I was writing my business plan 2 or 3 years ago. What happens is I would take one step. Oh, wait, there's a cliff there. Let's go over here. Oh, wait, there's a helicopter here. I can jump over here. There's some other things. Here's somebody with some money. Wait, this other person told me this other thing. Doing a startup is not a progressive line straight forward based on what you thought 2 years ago. It's like this. It's like, wait, it's like this, and I do a lot of experimentation. So if you write down a business plan, I'm sorry, I'm losing my breath a little bit. If you write a business plan, and you think all these things that might happen, and you're planning forward 2 or 3 years, you're over-engineering. You're guessing, and most importantly, you are lying. So investors, don't ask for business plans. Look for functional product and customer metrics. I need to take a break 1 second. I used to be a little younger and I could do this talk without stopping. You guys still with me? All right. Okay. Jackets. Yeah, I know. Good question, right? Okay, a little bit better. I got a chance to take a breath for a second. This is how I like to do talks. I'm wearing t-shirts and I could even kick these off and do this in my bare feet. This is better. Much better. Okay, so have I convinced you that business plans are probably not such a good idea and arguably unethical even? And I'm an engineer, mathematician by training, you're over-engineering for the future. As a startup, many things are not known. You're going to change plans quite considerably, and so having a hardened, sort of static plan for the future that lasts more than a few weeks, much less a few years, is probably not so useful, except to show that you might be able to, write an interesting story. I don't want to invest in stories. I want to invest in useful products that people use and hopefully buy, and maybe even buy again. So the things that we look for are functional prototypes, doing customer development exercises, lean startup testing. And we look for possibly unit economics that are cash flow positive. They might not be cash flow positive right away, but we'd like to see, can we make money on an individual transaction, perhaps now and perhaps in the future. And then most importantly, scalable. Internet marketing and sales says internet because some things aren't always online, but more and more the things that we think are interesting are the ability to scale customer acquisition, mostly online, hopefully cheaply, and most importantly, measurably. And so that's actually kind of what's interesting. So that other trend that we were talking about, there's lots more people online now. So I can do a lot of tests. Hopefully I can do those tests cheaply, and I can see whether people like those things or not. Now, this isn't really so much of a technology change. It's just the ability for me to measure things at scale quickly and easily, which allows me to apply a different way of building things and investing in things. Okay, let's talk a little bit about changes in venture capital. This is a lot of words that are a little bit too much color. I have really bad slides. I apologize. And he's telling me I have 5 minutes and I better hurry up. So things that have changed, a lot of things have changed, but probably most importantly from the venture capitalist perspective, that reduction in cost, the increase in ability to reach people, and then availability of startup ecosystems, which are still kind of getting together, and funding platforms has allowed me and others to do a lot more experimentation at small cost quickly. Probably starting with Ron Conway and First Round Capital, maybe in mid-2000 era, later Y Combinator, and then Techstars in 2005 and 6, and then ourselves, 500 Startups and AngelList more recently. And this is now happening globally. It's not just in the US anymore. In particular, one thing that's interesting is a lot of people accuse 500 Startups, or me in particular, of spray and pray investing, or making a lot of investments. And they probably also assume without much thought, although I hope they're wrong about that. Now, I'm not doing that because I don't care. I'm not doing that because I think it's fun or interesting. I do it because I think it has financial returns. And actually, by building a diverse portfolio, we can probably improve our returns. And I will give you the simple exercise of, right now in our portfolio, we think we probably will see an exit from maybe 20% of our investments. we'll see a meaningful exit from 5 to 10% of our investments. Meaningful, let's say 10x or better. And we might see a really, really meaningful exit, i.e. 50x or better, 1 to 2% of the time. Now, if you, from a mathematical perspective, would like to ensure that you're going to get that 50x outcome in your portfolio, and it only happens 1 to 2% of the time, you would logically say, well, I need 50 to 100 investments to ensure that that's going to happen. And in fact, I might actually want to engineer for more like 200 or more to ensure that I'll have more than just 0 or 1. So there's probably some logic to building a larger portfolio, and actually in traditional financial markets, this is quite accepted. I'm going to put my shoes back on here. In the startup world, it's not necessarily seen as something that's a best practice, although I think that we're quite wrong. So as a financial investor, what I would encourage you to think about is a portfolio approach. In particular, startups are not real estate. Real estate appreciates probably modestly, but most things win. Startups, most things fail, and a few things succeed really well. So an asymmetric outcome requires a portfolio approach. And usually 1 or 2 things might do really well. If you have enough investments and your deal flow and selection is not poor, you might have the chance to capture that very large investment. Yes. Okay, so we took this idea, and that's what we did. For our first fund, we had about 250 companies. For our second fund, we had a little bit closer to 325, and our current fund will probably have close to 500. 500, interesting number. And what we do is we write a small check, and originally that was about $25,000 to $100,000, and we assume a really high failure rate, about 80%. For a few of those companies, we wrote a second check, and for very few, we wrote a third or fourth check. And then we kind of wait. So over the first 2 or 3 years, we choose which companies we want to put some more money into, and then we wait, and between 3 to 7 years, we should start seeing some exits. And we'll see sort of modest exits within the first few years. We'll see bigger exits over time, and we might even get lucky and get that billion-dollar outcome every once in a while. So far, we've seen 2 or 3 of those, and we probably have about 30 companies that are worth $100 million or more. That's just not the right technology. Okay, so I'll try and go through this really quickly. How we think about investing. In most cases, we expect things to fail. In a few cases, we think it'll work, and we want to increase resources. I promise I'll go really, really fast. Product, market, and revenue is how we think about those. Those are incrementally increasing in the amount of money, and hopefully, maybe not so much in dollars, but a little bit, time. Yes? No? Am I supposed to be pointing this any particular place? Okay. So if you ignore almost everything that I've said, this one's probably a little bit interesting. So what we want to do is de-risk a few things. We want to de-risk the team's ability to produce a product and the team's ability to get customers, or at least find customers that like the product and use the product. And those are really important, but they're not that expensive anymore. There used to be a lot of money building product, and there used to be a lot of money getting customers. Now, at least some of that is a lot cheaper and a lot faster. So we don't actually have to invest in the first stages where they're building a functional prototype and testing early customer usage. A lot of times they can bootstrap that. They can do it on money from friends and family, maybe from accelerators or smaller folks. But what I'm really trying to understand is once you've got a functional product, and once I have some early customer usage and maybe some money, then I want to start looking at what's the possibility of scale. And I don't want to just predict that. I want to actually look at metrics that indicate that this might be possible. The team's able to produce products. They're able to acquire customers. There's some math behind the cost of those customer acquisition. And I start to build a financial model and understand the potential for scale. And then if it looks like it's going to scale and if it looks like it's going to make money, then we really start putting more money in. And that's what's actually been happening over the last 5 to 10 years is this process has now been accelerating faster and faster. And the companies that are working, instead of having a linear allocation of capital, it's now hyperbolic. So once you actually see that it's working, initially there's not much capital being spent and it's kind of experimentation. But once it's working, then they start putting lots of money in. And that's why you see a company like Uber growing to $40, $50 billion in value in 4 or 5 years, and people like me who passed on it at a $10 million valuation really feeling like I made a big mistake, unfortunately. All right, so in the first scenario, you're looking for customer validation, product validation. Really, can I build something and do people use it? In the second stage, I'm looking, can I expand customer acquisition? And what are the costs of expanding customer acquisition? What's the cost to acquire that customer, produce the product? When do I get revenue? And looking at that financial equation, can I make money, or do I need money to finance that process? And I might, be able to make $1 or $5, but it might take me 6 months until I get that break-even point. So there's a financial equation there, both to figure out how much capital to raise, and also understanding customer segmentation. Where do I acquire customers? How much do they cost? When do they generate money? If I'm successful in getting to the next stage, this is where big venture jumps in. It's like, okay, the equation is working. We can acquire lots of customers. We can make money, hopefully sometime. The WhatsApps of the world may be the exception, but most things, transactional, e-commerce, SaaS, marketplaces, et cetera. And then from a financial investor's perspective, I might be looking at when do I put more capital in. So we start investing when things are very cheap, right? Some things fail, some things sort of survive, and a few things thrive, right? And when we can detect that it's thriving, users are increasing, unit economics getting better, people putting money in, that's when I want to put more money in, hopefully before it gets too expensive and starts climbing up the wall. Okay, last big piece. I know they want me to get off the stage. Critical ecosystem factors for Silicon Valley. Well, you would probably think that there's a lot of reasons why Silicon Valley is very successful and can't be duplicated anywhere. Well, I'm from Silicon Valley, and I am here to tell you that Silicon Valley can be duplicated lots of places, and it's happening in Beijing, in Bangalore, in New York, in Sao Paulo, in Dubai, in lots of places, in Amman, Jordan, and probably in Tehran. I haven't been there yet, but I hope to see that sometime soon. And there are lots of advantages that Silicon Valley has: money, people, history, technology. But the one really big advantage that they have is insanity. Insanity is the one big advantage. We all kind of have this suspended disbelief, this mass hallucination that we are going to be successful. When we know most things fail, we jump off the cliff. Now, individually, that's an insane decision. I know I'm going to fail, or I know most people are going to fail, but I'm not going to fail. But collectively, we all jump off the cliff. Now, collectively, it's a smart decision, because some of us will succeed. Some of us will be able to build the plane on the way down. And hopefully the people who are about to die jump into the plane as it's being built on the way down. Now, one last thing before they're ripping me off the stage here. Okay, starting up. Building the initial experiment is really cheap. I can do it in my parents' basement. I can do it in a garage. I can do it on friends and family money. Maybe I have some accelerator dollars. That part's not too hard. The last piece is when you make a lot of money. I know you're going to pull me off the stage right away. The last part is where people want to see this stuff happening. This is where the big billion-dollar companies come out and everything is really great and easy. The part in the middle is the hard stuff. The part in the middle is where you actually need risk capital going in before the products are obviously working or not. And this is where it's actually most difficult for getting investor capital, most difficult to create funds. The common criticism of most startup ecosystems is that the entrepreneurs are not good enough, they are not ready, and they are the problem. And that is also wrong. The investors are the limiting factor in all ecosystems. The investors are the ones who are afraid to invest. The investors are the ones that are not as good at Silicon Valley. The investors are the ones who don't have experience building internet ecosystems. This is the challenge. It's not the entrepreneurs, it's the investors that limit the growth of startup ecosystems in every ecosystem around the world. That is very simply the problem. It's not because people are not smart enough. There's smart people everywhere. They might be inexperienced, but with a little bit of capital and experimentation, they will get smarter and they will succeed. The real magic of Silicon Valley is that there are crazy people who are investors who put money into companies early on, people like myself and many others, because they've seen that success over decades, and they've seen huge companies like Facebook and Google and Intel and Yahoo and others be very successful. And that capital gets spread widely, and it gets reinvested in the ecosystem. That's why we need to have that all around the world. Sorry for taking up too much of your time, but I hope that was useful. I hope to see some of you in Tehran very soon.